Let's jump in there.
I'm going solo.
Going that way?
All right. Aloha, everyone. Oh, this one. Aloha, everyone. We are here in Ocean View. We are joined by Civil Defense and the USGS Hawaiian Volcano Observatory to talk story about the most recent Mauna Loa eruption and preparation in general for Mauna Loa and our volcanoes in which we live. So we're going to hand it off here to Talmadge and Ken Hahn, and they're going to give a little bit of an intro, and then we'll break down and talk a little bit more individually with them. All right.
Sounds good.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. A couple things. This is January, and it is Volcano Awareness Month. So HVO does their round the island meetings, lectures, and talk stories to make awareness for volcanoes. And I think it was appropriate for Civil Defense to come out as well, you know, after the eruption that we just had in Mauna Loa. So we're here to, one, mainly listen to you all to get information as far as how it went for you during the eruption and maybe improve our operations, and then you know, share with you our information as far as what we like to put out for preparedness, for making yourself your own safe, and making sure that you're ready for the next event, whatever it is. Thank you.
Aloha, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm Ken Hahn. I'm the scientist in charge of the USGS Hawaiian Volcano Observatory. And over here is Mike Zoller. And Mike is a geologist. He handles all of our computer mapping. So he's the one that is in charge of keeping tabs on lava flows and where they are and how close they're getting to places. And then Katie Mullican, who is another geologist whose specialty is outreach and hazards communication to the public. So all these beautiful posters, Mike kind of put together the lava flow outlines, and then Katie put together all these really nice posters that, you know, show all these graphics and stuff. So just part of our team. So like as Talmadge said, we're real interested in hearing your stories too and your thoughts. That's why we had the little survey. And the other thing I'll just say is, you know, Mauna Loa is, when we came here the first time, the nice thing about Mauna Loa is its behavior is somewhat predictable. It starts at the summit, moves into a rift zone. Once it chooses a rift zone, stays in that rift zone, right? So you don't have to worry if it went down the northeast rift zone, you can just go, you know, back to normal life, which is a little hard after the 4 or 5 hours of sitting there through the summit eruption. I realized, you know, it's a little tense. You know, it started, you know, just before midnight and didn't really choose a rift zone until about 5 a.m. So I know Talmadge and I were both, we were a little nervous, to say the least. But as long as it's in the summit, we know that it's not going to reach any populated areas. And the same thing with the northeast rift zone. Once it chooses the northeast rift zone, you know, it's got the potential to reach down into the Hilo area or even in the volcano area, depending on where it goes. But that'll be like many days or weeks after an eruption starts. So your guys' community to us is special. Why we're here is because Mauna Loa, the one thing it does do is it starts fast and it starts with very high effusion rates. So the most lava comes out early and then it slows down a little bit during the eruption. So unlike some of the Kilauea eruptions, even the 2018 eruption, there were like 4 or 5 days of earthquakes leading up to Leilani Estate. So we knew that lava was going down under there, magma was moving under it, and that there was going to be an eruption. And then it started fairly slow because it had to push some old stuff out. Mauna Loa doesn't do any of that, right? So it starts at the summit, and then it'll move in a rift zone. The fractures will propagate, and usually the lowest fracture is the one where the lava flows will get sustained out of. And those lava flows, you know, it's not the end of the world. Those lava flows, because it is so steep, they do move fast, but they also stay as fairly ribbon-like structures, right? So if you look at this and look at it in the context of the whole of Mauna Loa, this eruption, even though it was an average Mauna Loa eruption, it was a pretty good sized one, didn't cover that much of Mauna Loa, right? It's a small strip of Mauna Loa. And if it would have come out on the same elevation, you know, it probably would have come down someplace around Volcano. and cut Highway 11 probably is likely because it stays so much steeper there. So, you know, it would have been a day or two on its way down into that area and would have made one ribbon that crossed there. So there's a lot of different ways, even if you do have a southwest rift zone eruption, that it can play out that it may not directly threaten your homes, but you want to be aware of it, right? That's the main thing. And then we want to be aware of issues you guys encounter, thoughts that you have of how we can do things better, and always keep preparedness going, because the one thing we do know is, you know, hazard is what the mountain is, right? The volcano has been there for almost 1 million years. So that hazard has existed the same. What changes is risk, right? Which is basically how many people do we put in the way of the thing, right? And so the one thing we know for sure is populations don't decrease usually. So we're going to keep seeing increasing populations, so the risk is always going to continue to climb during time. So we have to keep getting better just to keep up with that, right? So otherwise, we're here today to answer your guys' questions to start. So if you've got questions, and then if you want to, you know, if you have specific questions, we can move on to the map boards and stuff.
One thing I want to add, I have with me Tom Olson, Civil Defense Staff Officer, and related to what Ken said, as far as your risk, we have a product in coordination with USGS that pinpoints your address and what inundation zone you would be related to Mauna Loa eruption. So, you know, he's running that product if you guys want to take a look at that.
And they have, if you haven't signed up for their alert system, you know, then they will call you, because people were saying, well, it didn't evacuate, you know, I didn't get woken up until 5 in the morning or something. I've heard that from a couple of people. Why didn't you send out a, you know, a notice earlier? Well, the cell phones got notices that there was an eruption underway, but they didn't, you know, turn on all the sirens and stuff because there was no evacuation for this area, right? Because there was no direct threat of the lava, and it turned out the lava went the other way. So, you know, I mean, that's, you know, the evacuation would have been called as soon as we tell Talmage that lava is moving into the southwest rift zone, right?
And we were probably this far away anyway. So once he dug me,
we were talking a lot that night. So I was actually in Kona. My wife and I took 2 days off after Thanksgiving, and that was the first night. And so I got to see Mauna Loa from Kona. It was quite spectacular, and all the way up through the saddle that night, driving over, and straight back to hang out with Talmage in the Civil Defense Headquarters. So.
Hey Ken, I have a question.
Sure.
What is the total distance from Fissure 3 to the lava front wall?
As the lava.
Where the lava front wall was coming down towards the highway?
Oh, what was the length of the flow?
Yeah.
I'll leave that to, I think it's like 12 kilometers or 8 miles.
We can measure it on the map. Lava flow length, Fissure 3, 12.1 miles. 12.1 miles.
12.1
Oh,
miles.
is that? Yeah, okay, so it's further than I got my miles.
Thank you.
This is for Talmage. Could you explain what those different, you know, the different alert radio, et cetera? Can you just like briefly say how, like, and also should you be trying to be on all of them or one of them, or how are they different?
right, so this first one is Hawaii County's Everbridge mass messaging system. You actually sign up for this. And so this is the link, and this is the QR code to get into that link to sign up. On this one, I recommend that you only select the way you receive information, whether it's text, email, phone call, landline, or cell phone. Choose one, maybe two. Don't choose all of them, because you'll end up calling me and saying, hey,
Take it from me, I chose them all at first, and my house sounded like some sort of crazy yard or something. And every device in the house was going off, so yeah.
And then you can sign up for whatever kind of events impact you. If you live on the coast, you'll sign up for maybe high surf. If you're interested in road closures, fires, volcanoes, earthquakes, you know, you can select the specific events that affect you that you want to be warned about. So that's our system. On this one, this is the kind of what we talked about, the integrated public alert warning system. So, you know, you don't sign up for it. What this is the one that's going to be automatic through the government systems, where cell phones, radio, a TV crawler. Let's see, what was the other thing? No, there was no weather radio. It automatically broadcasts that. This other item here is the alert warning system, which is the sirens. And basically, if you hear the siren, you turn on your radio or your TV to see what the message is. That's how everything kind of works together. We ask, you know, redundancy is critical because the alert warning systems, the sirens, you know, if you're inside, it's marginal that you're going to hear it. If there's equipment running, it's marginal that you're going to hear it. So definitely have one of these other systems. Well, like sign up for ours. This one, like I said, is automatic. It's a national system. And the last one down here is kind of related to our Everbridge. When we put out that Everbridge message, it also includes a message, a verbal message that goes out by radio. Most of the stations on island carry them. I know you guys are limited down here. Prior to the eruption happening, we were working with Chris Leonard of KWXX and all his radio stations to put in a transmitter at our South Point radio repeater site for our handheld mobiles for police and fire, so that they will transmit their stations all the way down this coast. So fortunately, we didn't get it activated in time for the eruption, but that's still going to happen, so that for the future it'll be available down there. So that's all the alert system products that we have.
And then you can go to your webpage too. And our webpage will have information sitting on the webpage if there's an eruption in progress. So if you do have internet connection and you're wondering about it, but the web pages won't wake you up. Right? That top one will wake you up, and just as a person who's had it for a bunch of different things, if you have a concern, like say fires and volcanic eruptions are your main concerns, you know, that you're worried about living in this community, you might want to just set it for that, because then when it dings, you know it's the real thing and you should pay attention to it. If you've got it for road closures, high surf, you know, weather, then you're going to get a lot of dings in the middle of the night, and eventually you may not be listening to the ding. So think about what works for you, you know, and how you want that warning to come. You know, it's good to just put some thought into it.
Yes.
That system, the top one, the dings that you're talking about, will it work if your phone is off? Is there a way to make it push through?
No.
Okay.
But your phone can be charging, and just as long as you don't turn your phone all the way off, you know, mine will, you know, your phone will just go dark on its own if you just let it sit.
Yeah.
Or you just push the little button like on mine, you get it like this, and you push it again, it goes off.
Yeah.
In this format, plugged in and charging, it will do it. But if you shut it all the way down, then it won't do anything. But it will alarm you if it's sitting in this state.
So when I say off, I mean this volume should be more
Oh,
accurate. If your volume is off, I don't think it works.
no.
Is there a way for it to push through volume off?
It'll still come on the screen, notifications maybe.
Right.
You'll still
The
get
light will come.
on the screen.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll open up and turn on so the message is there. But yeah, so what I do with mine is I have a really obnoxious sound for these things so that it wakes me up, whereas my other text messages are either really quiet or so you can go in from each person that sends you something, you can change the ringtone for that person. So you can go in for this thing and change its ringtone or whatever you want.
Thank you.
I'll throw out a question. Volcano Watch, not too long ago, was talking about the model that was going to be used for the lava flows, and the thing that was different about that model is it gave the ability timings of the lava's arrival to certain points. I believe that was used in the Mauna Loa eruption.
We were modeling the flows constantly.
Yeah. The question is, how did it perform?
It performed very well. The new models take into account the properties of the lava, the cooling of it, the number of crystals in it. We have to make some assumptions, and then we also feed in stuff from earlier lava flows in that thing, so it's got a feedback loop. And we finally got it up on a supercomputer. It was taking, each time we ran a model, it took 4 or 5 hours. We got it so we could do about 300, 400 in an hour on the supercomputer. So we got people from our Washington, D.C. headquarters to help program it, rewrite it onto a supercomputer. But it's, you know, it's still not perfect because, like, if the eruption slows down or a channel breaks open, things will be different. So one thing we learned in 2014-15, when lava was sitting on the outskirts of Pahoa, and you could kind of put forecasts of where that lava flow was going to be in X number of days. Lava is a funny thing. It doesn't always go just based on the model, right? It goes, you know, where, depending on the supply rate. And one of the things, this model wasn't really that well tuned for the flat ground. It got tuned during the eruption, you know, so it was good, but we stayed intentionally away from forecasting the speed of arrival of lava flows and just said it's likely to keep moving at this rate, you know. But we didn't say where it was going, right? Because we're never sure. And in fact, what did it do? You know, because one of the things it could do is the eruption could stop, and then we don't have to worry about it anymore. So why get everybody anxious and saying, well, at this rate, in 3 weeks it'll be in Hilo? You know, nobody wants to hear that information at that point, right? Because if it doesn't happen. So we're really consciously trying to reduce levels of anxiety while not holding back information, because the models don't necessarily tell the truth, right? There's a lot of other things that can happen out there. They tell one version of the truth, which is helpful.
Yeah.
And it was very helpful, you know, in guiding, like, you know, these guys, you know, had to know, okay, if we're going to do something with the road and reroute it, how much time do we maybe have at the maximum amount of time? So it was being fed to the State Department of Highways and things like that, so they could make planning decisions if we had to route something around that thing to keep the saddle road open. So it goes into the planning function, and at some point, if we really find that it's super useful and we can really trust it, then we could put it out in the public. But again, the one that went into Pahoa, we just learned that it raised anxieties really high, and then it didn't come through, and then people didn't trust what you said after that. So there's all that kind of feedback that's important. So we just kind of stayed with, this is what it's doing. If it continues, it'll take about this long to get over here, you know. But we don't know that it'll continue at this rate. We're not sure which direction, because it was a flat ground. It was in a place where it could either go towards Kona or towards Hilo, right? We just really didn't know, you know. So we tell you what we know. And, yeah.
Well, my compliments. I thought you guys did a great job of analyzing and reporting. I mean, you didn't raise anybody's expectations or anxieties unnecessarily. I thought the reporting you did was fabulous.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, that was also intentional after watching 2018, where the story got out of hand, and then it just barreled to where the whole island was under lava, and everybody should evacuate, and everybody across the island was in anxiety. Could the lava come over here now? And so we really wanted to make sure we messaged that it's over here, it's staying here, it's not going anywhere else, and this is what it's doing. So that was all a conscious effort between us and Civil Defense and the Mayor's office, you know, to make sure we learn sometimes slowly from these things that, you know, things that are obvious to us can get carried away, especially when the national news media and the world news media is involved. They want to write a story, right?
Well, I personally love the live feed camera, or plural, I guess, cameras. That was really helpful for some of us to just kind of keep an eye out, you know.
Yeah, well, great. And the reason we could do that is because of the head of our field engineering group just tipped on to this thing that is a first responders network that operates at a slightly lower frequency than the rest of cell phones.
Yeah.
Because there was no bandwidth in the saddle, because there were thousands of people up there sending pictures to their Instagram account, you know. So, and then also it took, you know, we did about a 0.5 terabyte of data in a couple of weeks from there. So you can't go get at AT&T a half a terabyte plan, right? And if you did, it would cost, so we found a way, it cost us a few $1,000, but that was affordable. So we finally found a way to do it. And that's what we've got going from the summit now too, is we have these new modems that we can get in and we can get a bigger data plan on them. And so, yeah, it's great, but we've been puzzling over this for a couple years.
Well,
And this
pass
is-
on compliments to whoever came up with the
That's
scheme
Kevin
that allowed
Kamabash,
that.
he came up with that, and he's a genius in finding these things. And it really came out of our American Samoa response, that we needed modems out in the outer islands, the Manoa Islands of America Samoa. We needed some way to make connectivity, and he found some people, and virtually nobody in the hazards. We found one person in our earthquake program that was using it, and he taught Kevin how to use it, and then, so it's been one of those learning experiences. It's just a great experience. So, yeah, so hopefully we can kind of keep live feeds on things now.
Well,
And,
pass
yeah.
on compliments that it was notable.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that, because, what, on social media and, like TikTok and all of those, there was just all this, oh, Mauna Loa's erupting, and they had like video of like, that's not even Mauna Loa. And so I'm like, what? And so it just kind of snowballed and got crazy. So, but having actually the live feed, so you can actually go look and say, no, this is it, here's what it's really looking like, and it's not looking anything like what social media is just exploding over.
Right.
There are a lot of people that want to put false narratives out there for whatever reason. It seems to be a very popular thing to do, not just in volcanoes, in pretty much everything, yeah. So, and that's why when we came here, Talmadge and I, like one of our things was, this is what we can tell you, this is what we can't tell you, Like there was a rumor going on before the eruption that the lava was going to come down and cross the road between Naalehu and Pahala, right? And I'm going, that's not us, because I would love to be able to know it in advance like that I could tell you all that, but I can't, so.
Keep it on the northeast rift. Keep it up there.
I'm with you there, but I don't really have a vote. I'm not consulted, about where it's actually going.
I think we get out the bomber, and then we'll bomb the flow, and that will stop it, right?
Third time's a charm.
Yeah, there's more stuff coming out. Like if you want to know, like, okay, so this thing was moving at about, what do we figure, about 150 cubic yards a second, right? And so when you think the biggest dump trucks around are about 20 cubic yards or something like that, so what you're looking at is 6 or 7 giant dump trucks a second delivering stuff. And unless you've got a hole you can bury that in,
Gotta go somewhere.
you've got a problem. It's got to go somewhere. And luckily what we had is a big flat space with nothing on it where that was, and it was
Just
perfect.
The sheer volume of material that comes out of these volcanoes, whether it's Kilauea or Mauna Loa, it's just, the sheer volume is just boggling.
Yeah.
I mean, we live on a flow from 1926, just up the road here, and our property was in effect just a giant lava tube for everything that flowed down to Noalini and Loa. And I just think about, you go down to Noalini and turn and you look at that big black stain coming down the hill, and you think about the sheer volume of material that these volcanoes kick out. It's just amazing. I mean,
Well, you're on these are the highest volume eruptive rate volcanoes in the world.
Yeah.
And Mauna Loa didn't get to be the biggest active volcano by sitting around not doing anything. Yeah. And in order, if you want to build a tropical island in water that's 12 to 15,000 feet deep, you better get busy, right? If you want to be erosion by rain in Hilo, you better be busy, right? And so these volcanoes are busy. They are putting out, there's a question about who's the most active volcano in the world, but there's no question about which volcanoes put out the most lava. It's our 2 volcanoes are by far, they put out more lava than any other volcanoes.
Would you anticipate that there'll be more mapping of the sills underneath? Do you anticipate that there'll inevitably be some kind of connection between Kilauea and Mauna Loa?
Well, that's the paper that came out just recently about under Pahala, all the earthquakes, and that magma is moving in kind of these flat-lying things because it's,
Yeah.
kind of percolating in there. And it's very interesting because we don't know much about the structure of the hotspot. That's the top of the hotspot where it kind of goes from plasticky rock into hard rock, right? So how does the melt move through that hard rock transition? And so it's really fascinating, and we actually had our seismologist, Nympha Bennington, who's at the observatory, is working with another seismologist from Manoa, and they put out about 200 seismometers in that area this spring.
Yeah.
And so we hope to get, and they're working with the guys that did the machine learning at Caltech. So we hope that we get a refined picture from that.
But you would, that picture that you're anticipating, would that be mostly of Kilauea? Or do you anticipate that there might be some kind of insight into Mauna Loa as well?
We haven't targeted Mauna Loa. We're actually going to put out a project this spring and early summer that puts 2,000 seismometers over the top of Kilauea. And we're actually going to bring a truck from the mainland that makes little vibrations. And so, like they do in the oil industry or something, we're trying to reflect off of layers, different layers at depth, so that we really we're basically trying to x-ray Kilauea's plumbing system, which will connect with what we did down around Pahala. So we're trying to, and people have already proposed doing that for Mauna Loa, but we've got a limited bandwidth on how many places we can do these studies at one given time. So there's the technology to do it out there now, and so we'll see how these first couple come out. And then I think there'll be a lot of interest.
I'd like to hope it's going to be kind of a teaser. You're gonna get a good map of Kilauea, and you're gonna say, well, what's that little spot over there? That'll encourage you to go to Mauna Loa.
Well, and it's all just a snapshot in time. That's the other thing you got to keep in mind, that these things are very dynamic, and so we've got one picture. It's like you take a picture of your neighbor doing something, and then you try to interpret everything else they're going to do in their life from that. It's like, they're always washing their windows. That's all they do is wash their windows.
Another question.
Yeah, is the observatory road open off of Saddle? Has it been cleared? I know the lava had come across.
Oh, the
it.
lava cleared off? Oh, that's
Yeah.
not going to be cleared for
Is
a long
there
time.
a time estimate on when that road would open?
We have sent information to the Mauna Loa Observatory, State Department of Highways, DLNR, and then a contractor that works for them about the cooling. Probably the thing they're going to do is like when they open the road at first to Poiki, they just crushed rock over the top of the lava flows. So that's probably to get into the Mauna Loa Observatory. They probably will do that at first. I can't say for sure what their plans are, and I don't know if Talmadge knows anything more than I do about that.
That's all a big part of it, but also the other side is the funding side of it. So FEMA's taking a look at it, trying to come up with some values to see what, who's gonna fund it basically.
Yeah.
The road, the lava crossed in 3 spots? Is that correct?
Well, 2 of the spots kind of merged into more or less one spot, didn't they, Mike? I mean, there's a little bit of a gap in there.
Two flows, but the one flow is particularly wide and crossing a bunch of different sections.
Yeah, it crossed in 2 separate channels at first, right? But then the overflows kind of took out the rest. And what you said it's like 11 meters deep or something? So, so over 30 feet thick in the thickest parts of it. So, and it'll get down to 100 degrees C after about a year, about 2 feet down. So 100 degrees C is boiling water temperature, right? So it's going to take a while before the core of that flow cools off, So it's the same thing, the problem in Puna, why they're waiting to, make some of these roads and stuff too, is it's still really hot inside those lava flows.
Thank
The inside of these things are squishy still, they're the ones up there. If you broke into it, you would get liquidy stuff that would come out, And bulldozers, well, they're pretty tough. When you get them hot, all the grease comes out, and then they don't work so well after that. So my advice to DLNR was, use somebody else's bulldozer.
Do you have another question?
This has to do with evacuation. What do you, from civil defense, tell us about, when the roads are clogged? Like we might hopefully have a radio that we can be listening to. It's not really a specific I just know of other disasters recent, where, people had to abandon their cars and that kind of thing. So it's like, just looking at that worst case scenario kind of thing, what you guys would tell us to.
Right, so fortunately in this situation, we did not issue a mandatory evacuation. But we're always looking at evacuations because we're concerned about tsunami as well. And definitely in those cases, we see where in the city areas that there could be times when congestion is so bad that you just got to abandon your car. In tsunamis, it's a little bit easier because you just got to move to a certain point and you'll be out of it. I think Ken had mentioned already that the flows will be in a ribbon. In the case of eruption, flows are like in a somewhat thin ribbon. That if we run into that situation, and it didn't happen here, but if we do put in a mandatory evacuation, police, fire, all the different departments that are involved with evacuation would be in place at stations. So working at the EOC, once we determine where the flow is going, if there is a section of roadway that we know, or like the inundation zones, and that's the reason for it, because we'll know what exact areas that we'll have to make sure is clear, that people are out of. So we'll focus on that, get those people out of there, whether they abandon their vehicles, but yeah, we'll work at the ground level to make sure that people aren't exposed, getting overrun by lava. Unfortunately, evacuations, even in this case, we were self-evacuated. We heard stories that there was some congestion happening. And that would be the fact if there was a mandatory evacuation as well. But we're monitoring the whole situation so that we can take care of the individual, like if the flow starts coming down to a section, like I said, we can deal with that.
Or two flows, or like I was talking with, is it Tom or? Where flows cut off sections, between.
Right. And so, like was mentioned as well, if you go towards Pahala, gets you out of the danger zone that much faster. And so, having those discussions that people are headed that way.
Yeah, and one thing to remember too is we talk about fast-moving lava flows. The front of a fast-moving lava flow, even on the steep slopes, is moving about 10 miles an hour. So it's like speed of a car in a parking lot. So you'll see this thing coming down the slope. If you see it coming where your car is stuck in traffic, you want to just move to the side, get off on the road, walk out, and walk away from it, right? So you will have time to move. It's not going to it's not like Dante's Peak, the movie where they were sitting in grandma's cabin and all of a sudden the lava flow was knocking down the back wall of the cabin, right? So these things, you'll have some time, you'll see it coming down the hillside. You don't want to be in the path of the lava flow if that does happen. So, but that's going to be a very, very small area and a very small number of people. Even if we had that worst case scenario, a very small number of people impacted. And you just need to know, keep your head calm and just react,
Do you have any theories on why Mauna Loa was quiet for 40 years? Or, I know it's a guessing game what's going on down there, but I read somewhere it's like an average, it would erupt every 5 years, if you average it out over this course of historical records, but
yeah. So Frank Truesdale, the guy who came and talked here last time, I don't know if you were here for Frank's talk, but Frank is the person who's put his whole career into mapping out in careful all the different eruption flows back for thousands of years on Mauna Loa. And he's got a really good record going back about 3,000 years. So if you just divide the number of eruptions into the number of years, it's about 6 years between Mauna Loa eruptions for the last 3,000 years. Yeah. If you look at the documented record from 1833 up to 1950, it was a lava flow every 3.5 years. Yeah. And now, since 1950, we had a 25-year span, a 9-year span, and a 38-year span, right? So we're in a kind of uncharted territory here, and this just shows you the averages don't always tell you what they think to do, you know, like the coin flip thing doesn't always work in your favor. But, you know, there does seem to be a general tie between the amount of lava being put out in Kilauea. In the 1800s, Kilauea was up in the summit area and putting out less lava than it did out after 1950. So it was putting out a couple cubic yards a second as opposed to like 3 to 5 cubic yards per second. So, and we're still, Mike has been the one that's been tracking our fusion rates at Kilauea, and I don't know, that's something we ought to probably do is look at our average since the eruption started again. Do you have any idea what that is?
Kilauea has generally put out about 3 cubic meters a second. You know, that's its long-term rate that it settled into during the last eruption. And the current eruption that just started last week up there seems to be starting to settle into a trend that's pretty similar to that, where it's about 3 years, or maybe 3 to 4.
Which is what we know from looking at a whole bunch of eruptions is kind of the long-term supply rate. So it's basically what's coming in is pushing something else out at the top. So that much comes in at the bottom, pushes that much out at the top. It's been pretty much a flow-through situation. Yeah?
Is there any corollary or relationship between the flow in Kilauea versus the flow in Mauna Loa? So for example, if Kilauea happens to be very active, is Mauna Loa kind of less so? And if the Kilauea activity was to reduce, would we expect there might be more activity in Mauna Loa?
Well, that's what we were just saying is that before 1950, the average output of Kilauea was less than 3 cubic yards a second, down around 1 to 2 or something like that. And it kind of sustained those low rates through the 1800s in there. And then there was a big gap between 1924 where there were just a couple tiny eruptions in 1950. And then after 1950, Kilauea picked up and Mauna Loa dropped off. So there does seem to, but this is one set of data points, remember, and you've got 1 point, you can draw as many straight lines. Even if you have 2, you can draw a straight line through it. So we know there is this observation. Whether or not that is really the cause of it, we don't know.
We don't know if an inverse relationship necessarily.
Yeah, might be. There's a hint at it, but you know, you just need more data to be sure. So it'll just take time. So, you know, and right now, like Mike said, Kilauea still seems to be on the high side of that supply rate, so it doesn't appear that we're flipping into that lower eruption regime, but you know, it could be gradually moving that way, and Mauna Loa activity might pick up, or we might have another.
I think of it as kind of a pressure release valve almost. So if Kilauea is just bubbling as it is now, it's at least releasing the pressure, whereas if it were to cap off, I wonder if Mauna Loa might increase its activity. That's pure speculation.
Yeah, and you know, the system in the hotspot is density driven, not pressure driven.
Okay.
So it's just looking around it going, oh, I'm lighter than you are, I'm going up, you know. And until you get up into the summit magma chambers and the rifts, where then we start building some pressures into those things, most of it is a density driven ascent of magma. So, you know, the pressure, but there is some stuff like we noticed for the very first time we've had, you know, in 1984, we didn't have all these real-time instruments measuring locations. And so we noticed as Mauna Loa erupted, it reduced pressure on Kilauea, and Kilauea actually moved a little bit back towards Mauna Loa. So we actually saw that kind of Mauna Loa pushing on Kilauea, which you would think there's 2 different theories. That could either be squeezing the magma chamber and making more stuff coming out, or it could be trying to pinch it closed. So we don't know, but it doesn't seem to have had a profound effect on Kilauea.
What's the next generation of technology that you're looking to apply? I mean, you're going to deploy all these seismographs. What's beyond that? What's the next generation of technology?
The next generation of smart kids is the technology that we apply. You know, like, people don't make a lot of stuff for geology. You know, it's just not a big market. So what you get is really smart people that learn how to weasel something made for something else into a way to use it to help us detect what's going on.
Good luck on that.
You know, I mean, GPS, global GPS was not created to measure volcanoes. was created to drop bombs on people, So, but we're using it very effectively to measure how our volcanoes swell, how plates move on the surface of the earth and stuff. So basically, really, we just need more creative people, and it's one of the neat things about science is you think all the science is done. No, we've done what we can do with the limits that we've got, but each time there's a technological advance, then we learn more, and people, there's just a whole new set of windows opened up and a whole new set of questions you can ask.
Yeah, kind of a question about the post-Kilauea, the 2018 eruption. I mean, I've read that out of fissure 8, when that one finally just started chugging everything, like lava out, that the temperature increased and the flow was just coming out so fast. And it lasted for so long. Could it be possible that whatever tube or wherever the feeder was that went down through there, I mean, the flow stopped, the lava went out, but that conduit could still be in place?
Oh yeah, that conduit could still be in place, but it definitely, what you want to think about the Kilauea thing is we had that shallow magma chamber underneath Mauna, right?
Yeah.
And so it's up here, and it basically, the feeder went kind of down and back up again, but it's got pressure, it's basically a hydraulic pressure system. So once we open this thing down at 600-foot elevation, the top of this is at about, 2,000 feet or something like that. So it just started draining that big tub of lava that was up shallow in there. And it drained it down to where there was some sort of pressure relationship that it just sort of stopped at that point.
And so, but the level of the caldera was like, I mean, I think I heard James' program was like only 30% the volume of what it was in 2018 or something like that. So it's possible that.
You mean the hole in the ground?
Yeah, actually the lava.
We'll let Mike talk about the size of the hole in the ground versus what came out.
I mean, it's like the level of where it is now compared to where it was in 2018 when all of a sudden it drained and all of it went that way. It's like, I'm just envisioning, it's like, is it just filling up to have that
So, I think that 3% number you're citing is the relative volume of the pit that's there now versus Hale Mauna pre-2018.
Yeah.
But that's actually, that's not necessarily the comparison that's important. The important comparison is what came out, the amount that the summit collapsed versus how much came out on the rift zone.
Yeah.
And it's almost exactly the same.
Oh.
So there's a very clear correlation that the summit drained by the amount that erupted out on the rift zone. Nonetheless, our geophysical studies show that the summit magma chamber is still much larger. Yeah, there's many cubic kilometers. There's about 1 cubic kilometer of lava that was erupted on the rift zone, about 1 cubic kilometer that was lost at the summit. But the summit magma chamber is still much bigger than that.
Yeah, the shallow one still has material in it.
Oh.
And then there's a deeper one that we think has a lot more in it. But that deeper one, and that's what the big caldera collapses are caused when that deeper one drains. But you got to go underwater to drain it, right? And so that's, if you had a big eruption, you would pull the plug on the rift zone underwater, so you wouldn't be worried about the surface flows. You'd be worried about the collapse, but not that. Mauna Loa, probably 1,000, 1,500 years ago, if you lived in Hilo, the whole Panaeva area going out, there, and you can look at it on if you go look over at Hilo, point it out to Mike, where Hilo Bay is.
Yeah.
And then there's a giant round-shaped thing there that's a huge lava delta that is, we pulled the plug at about the 3,000-foot elevation level on Mauna Loa's rift zone and did that, and that's probably what ended up with Mokua Vale caldera collapsing. We don't have real great timing on those two events, but we know there was an enormous set of lava flows that covered a huge part of Hilo in there by pulling it, and that's the top of Mauna Loa's magma system is up at about 3,000 to 4,000 feet. So generally, if you were up at Hawaii Volcanoes National Park and sitting at the summit of Kilauea and you looked over, if you were to tunnel into Mauna Loa, you would be kind of at the top of its magma plumbing system there.
I'll do one more. So one of the reports that came out during the Mauna Loa eruption was that the chemical signature didn't include previous eruptions. And that's something that we saw, the signature from past eruptions in that chemical signature, is that correct?
you mean it didn't mix with older
Yeah, it
stone
didn't
lava?
mix with the old stuff.
No, but that's typical of Mauna Loa.
I was wondering if.
Yeah,
what
so
your
Mauna
thoughts on that.
Loa, because the older stored stuff, if you notice on Kilauea, is mostly down on the rift zones.
Right.
Mauna Loa, what it does, instead of coming up and underneath that, it starts at the summit and then it opens the fissures from the summit down and just peels it apart. So basically the hot new lava is coming out at full blast, basically, in a Mauna Loa eruption. Whereas in Kilauea, it has to clear that older stuff down on the lower parts of the rift zone. The one exception was 1868, where it opened up on that far eastern limb of the rift zone over by Kahuku Ranch. But that was due to, it started as a summit eruption, and then there was a magnitude 8 earthquake. And that dilated the rift zone and allowed it to jump all the way down there. And so it jumped from the summit all the way to that odd spot that normally there hasn't been lava over there for thousands of years, right? They're very infrequent flows there. So, and what we tell people is that, you know, really if you're worried about that on Mauna Loa, the earthquake that causes it is going to be much worse than the eruption that follows it. So.
Yeah. Thank you.
So if you want to go look at maps and things, you know, and Mike and Katie and I and Alex and Tom are all here. So if you got specific questions or comments you want to pass on to us. And we really appreciate everyone that filled out one of the little surveys to tell us your story. You know, your stories are really important to us.
Well, thank you guys for doing this. Appreciate it.
Sure. We're glad to come down here and talk to you anytime.
Yeah, we can go on to some posters.
And if you want to touch, here is some of the pumice that came out of this eruption up by the vent. So if you want to come and hold it and feel what it feels like, there's a few pieces here and you can kind of see a whole bag of it here. Thanks for coming.
We are going to take you around and show some of these displays. We have USGS has created a bunch of displays here. We're going to try and just show some of those a little bit and have some of the people from USGS talk about it.
This area was being made actually. Yeah, so the whole summit region was pretty much included. And by how much, like, was your micro? I don't know off the top of my head, I'm sorry. Yeah, it'd be pretty negligible, like less, centimeters maybe. Yeah. And then this is just a map showing the stations that we have all around the island. So the GPS that I mentioned, we also have things called tilt meters, and those actually show how the ground is tilting.
More densely image the
Seismometers which measure earthquakes, of course. We have a number of gas sensors. We actually had one in the summit caldera that was destroyed during the eruption, and web cameras. So. And I guess the other thing to note is that prior to this recent eruption, before the eruption in 1984 and 1975, there were these regions of earthquake activity. So this is the summit caldera. You can see them there. Yeah, so there's earthquake activity kind of deeper beneath the summit, and then this northwest region, or region just northwest of the summit. And prior to 1975 and 1984, there was seismic activity there, or lots of earthquakes, and we saw the same thing in this recent eruption as well, just before it. So when both of these areas started having earthquakes in September, that's when we started doing the community meetings over the fall, because that was kind of an indicator that things were escalating. So.
We're just eavesdropping a little bit.
Okay. And then this
Yeah,
is
6600
a
feet.
record from one of the summit seismometers that shows it was really quiet. This is the 27th, so the day that the eruption happened. You can see it was really quiet. There wasn't many earthquakes at all. And then at, just before 11 p.m. is when the earthquake activity really picked up. So yeah, things can escalate really quickly.
All of that road is
And
open.
they did.
Yeah, I think it is.
You mentioned
No, he,
I'll jump in here.
the road that's closed.
So you're showing here the lead up to the 2022 eruption now, yeah? 2022, 2022. So what you were just highlighting there is the difficulty in like the window, right? The window is open in that Mauna Loa eruption is possible here, but the difficulty in that snap.
That's a good way to describe it. Yeah.
Right,
Definitely.
and I remember I was watching the EGU, they were having a conference debriefing about it, and that was one of the things that stood out. It's like, one person's like, yeah, we totally expected it. It was completely, we had all the community meetings, and the next person's like, it totally snuck up on us. And we had like 40 minutes worth of time.
Yeah.
So
you
it's
could
like,
say
true
that.
at the both are true. Like.
Yeah, totally. Like we knew that the system was primed, but like when the trigger was going to be pulled was difficult to call. And like this plot shows it happened really quickly, but we knew that it was possible.
Right, and it didn't do it any favors for people being at 11 o'clock on a
No,
Sunday night.
yeah,
kind of
so like
thing.
everyone's asleep. I got woken up.
Right.
Yeah, and then it's like you have to get your gears going out of sleep, which is
And my thing was like, all right, so I was up at the time and I was sitting there watching the earthquakes. It's like, all right, so do I call somebody now, or do I wait? And then all of a sudden one of the cameras get a little orange. It's like, all right, well.
Yeah, we were kind of going through the same thing, like monitoring the earthquake activity, trying to get the notice out that things were like looking like an eruption was going to happen, but then the eruption beat us to it. So.
Were you involved with the monitoring of the Southwest Rift in that 6 hours?
I was up that night. I was not watching the webcams. Like we had a, divvied up responsibilities. There were people watching webcams, people watching seismic activity, and I was more involved in like getting information on the website out to the public. So yeah, I wasn't involved in watching it. So how did you hear about the eruption? Or you saw the earthquake?
I mean, I put up an earthquake post before it happened type of thing on the tracker, and then I was sitting there hawking on the cams, and what was it, the M1 cam? It got a little orange, and it's like, all right, I have the recordings of this camera for the past year. It doesn't go orange randomly at night. I can't see any lava, but I'm just waiting for the F1 or the thermal to update. And at that point, it's just like, all right, ship it, it's erupting. But yeah, I mean, most everybody else is, a phone call or something along those lines. But I do nights, and 11 o'clock at night is like prime time. So was up and ready for that, and then we ended up going live immediately after that and staying live until 5 a.m. Having Ken Hahn join us and Mitch join us, and that was really cool.
Yeah, it's good that they were proactive in talking to people. Talking with you guys, they know that you have a huge following, so trying to reach as many people and as diverse an audience as they could.
I think it was a really good run to have under the belt because, I'm just going to say it, I don't think we were ready for this. If this came Southwest in that time, I don't know if we were really ready for it type of thing. People getting woken up at 5 a.m. It's rough. It would have been rough, but we got one under the belt. Everybody has one under the belt. The residents that had no perception of Mauna Loa before now have experienced a Mauna Loa eruption type of thing, and that's big.
Yeah, a lot of new residents. Yeah, that's true. And it's a good reminder that, it's an active volcano, and it will erupt again. And, just a question of when. So,
right. Well, thank you for your time, and this ad hoc little presentation here.
No problem.
So, has anything been moving up there since? I mean, it kind of dropped out of the news.
We have a poster showing what's happening right now on Mauna Loa, and it is interesting. We're seeing increased rates of ground deformation compared to prior to the eruption, but that's what was observed after 1975 and 1994. So it's not something to be worried about, not something that we're surprised to see, because that's what happened after the previous eruption.
Is it difficult to, because you're seeing it a lot more now in terms of the ability to capture it? right?
Yeah.
So it's hard to be like, you know, apples to apples comparison back then, and you're trying to like, all right, so we see so much better. So if we couldn't see as good, what would it actually look like to compare
Yeah,
it?
and it was very similar for the lead up to this eruption too, just that we have really more modern monitoring technology, and so we had data from prior to the previous eruptions, but how to compare it to what we were seeing before this eruption, and so we're seeing the same thing now, which is like the after eruption monitoring data is a little bit different as well, or more detailed, so yeah.
Yeah, I remember that night when it erupted, looking at the signals, like, wow, there really isn't anything that's, you know, telling me like 2 hours ago and I just didn't see it type of thing. It's only 40 minutes of warning. In retrospect, is there anything that, like, looking at like, oh, well, there was actually a tilt signal, or it was that fast?
It was that fast, yeah, and on that poster, you can go take a look at it. We have the tilt record as well. Tilt started to go up shortly, I think maybe around the same time as the earthquake activity. So there was really no advance warning beyond these earthquake patterns that we had been kind of that prompted us to do the community outreach in the fall, which was really the summit earthquakes and then this cluster of earthquakes northwest of the summit when they started going off simultaneously, and there was a lot of earthquake activity, but on top of that, what the seismologists call microseismicity, so really small earthquakes that even our system doesn't detect. But by looking at the records,
but it's different than tremor. Right?
Yeah,
like
there's still like
micro.
Yeah, tremor is movement of fluids. These are like actually individual little tiny earthquakes, basically. So yeah.
Interesting. Well, thank you for the time.
Yeah, thanks, Dave.
All right. We'll try and get one more in.
Even as recently, the earliest pictures of the summer there, I've seen, even then, there was still remnants of that deeper collapse on the period. And then you can still kind of see the shells.
Yes, we can just go around to the crystal shield that's.
So it could erupt still, but because it's so far away from the top, it doesn't really have a magma chamber anymore, and it doesn't have a core there because you need a magma chamber to collapse and create a core there. So when Mauna Kea does erupt after 1,000 years, it's generally just like a single batch of magma comes up to it.
And then even less so Haleakala and Maui.
Haleakala and Maui actually, the geologic mapping suggests more often than not.
An opportunity to go and talk to somebody else. Everybody's occupied right now.
Despite how far it is from when we get hotspot, we think that might be because of how big it was. It might have depressed the crust in such a way that it's still able to maintain a little bit of
1780 around there when it was
about 500 years ago. 500 years ago from Haleakala, who will rely on last year 1801.
okay. And of course, Hawaii. And
We are now joined by Talmadge Magno, the administrator of civil defense. Appreciate your time. Just wanted to, go back over a little bit, just this whole Mauna Loa thing. I know we were here, less than 6 months? No, it's only like 3 months ago, right?
Yeah, November.
Yeah, we were here and doing the thing. There was a lot more people here then, huh?
Yes.
It seems like we got one behind us now at this point, which seems to be great for experience. How was the experience, for you guys? A little bit different than the just simulations of the whole Mauna Loa eruption, huh?
Right. So, it was interesting how everything begins basically, and this one you get the call in the middle of the night that it's looks like it's going to erupt, and so we had done that scenario so many times. And we know in our discussions that things in the middle of the night is probably the worst situation. because it adds more complexity to any evacuation, any response. So that was, the worst situation. But nevertheless, we gathered right away, we organized, everybody responded to our emergency operations center and got everybody activated, and right away we were monitoring, just trying to get a handle on where the flow was. Right away the feeds start coming in, that people are seeing it from all these different vantage points. We were getting word that people were self-evacuating out of Ocean View, out of the South Kona area. On our end, we were comforted because we knew that the flow had not traveled down the Southwest Rift yet. So we knew that, there was no life safety threat at that point. But managing what was going on was happening. We quickly dedicated 2 evacuation centers, shelters for folks to go to, just in case they needed it. In some cases, they did go to the Kona one, the Kona airport. So that progressed, and not till early in the morning did we HVO detect the magma moving down the northeast rift. So, based upon all what we've been educated and trying to share with the public, we knew that at that point we were weeks to months from any kind of impact to communities. So you kind of breathe a sigh of relief for this area, but then you start focusing on that side. What's going to be the impact on that side? So definitely the operations fell into place, and there was plenty of support from all levels of government, from the public, getting information out. So we comment now that it was kind of the best scenario. We got lucky that it didn't go into any community like it did in 2018. So, it ended up being kind of like a spectator sport, basically.
Right, and that's the next thing I want to talk about was the viewing area, because that's something that we weren't able to do in 2018. It took a lot of coordination, it looked like, between what was county, state, Puakaloa training area, I don't even know who else, DOT, but how did you, from the county standpoint, how was the viewing area? Because I hear a lot of people raving like, oh, it was a once in a lifetime experience, those types of things, and how was it to facilitate that from a county perspective? Was it challenging? Was there all kinds of obstacles, pitfalls?
Well, there's definitely the challenges, but with the partnerships that came together, we're lucky that that old Saddle Road portion existed. The other option would have been, because of the potential life safety risk on that highway with the high speeds and so forth, there was going to be some possible changes to access to that road if we never came up with that detour that kind of helped mitigate the traffic issues. So the mayor, Mayor Roth, and Parks and Recreation Director Mo Messina were up there one day looking for what other alternatives they had, and they came up with that idea, quickly put it together, and talked to the colonel up at PTA, and things came together.
Yeah, and again, it's just one of the things I keep hearing is just people telling me how impressed they were with that whole thing, right? Being able to get access to it, because there's a lot of people, like even in 2018, they never got that closure, right? To be able to go and pay their respects to the lava, and a lot of people have felt like, people that refused to go see the lava after 2018 went out to see this one, and it gave them, I was told it gave them closure, a lot of those guys, just being able to, put it down, because the last time they might have seen the lava was running away from their house, and the house getting taken, and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I really appreciate you guys, going that extra bit, because I know there was, probably pressure just close the road and, do that kind of.
Yeah, but we, all the partners were there, and a big partner in this event and setting up that area was State Departments of Transportation Highways. You know, they were a big player, made everything happen, but you know, we're coordinating because, like I say, the life safety risk to the people driving, just commuting, and the people viewing was a big concern, and we had to come up with an alternative, or it would have been a change in the situation on DKI.
Right, and there was all those accidents right beforehand too, that
Right.
just piling up there, and becoming an unsafe situation it was.
Yeah, you saw the trends, and we didn't want that to happen. You know, unfortunately, this island's no stranger to that because in the pool flows, the big fountaining periods, when people would go to view that along Highway 11, there was numerous fatalities during that period. You know, you got a highway that's running 55 miles an hour and all these pedestrians there. It's just
It's a similar, I didn't even think of that, but yeah, that would be a very similar type circumstance where guys are pulling off of this road onto places that there is no shoulder, and they're making their own shoulder.
We're stepping out of their cars into
the brush and off the hill.
you know, it's so. Like I said, it kind of worked itself out, and it was a good situation.
Well, hey, I appreciate you putting all this on, coming out to the communities. I think, you know, it's very important to keep that presence up, right? You know, I mean, we see it too. Whenever there's activity and, you know, the talk of the mountain, everybody wants to come and talk about it. But it's times like this, right, where really the work gets done and really you start getting those branches out into the community for the next one.
Right, absolutely. The next, like I've said, the next eruption started when this last one ended.
Yes.
And so, you know, we thank you guys for your efforts to put the message out as well.
All right. Well, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thanks, you guys. Thank you.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah, sure.
We need a wheel barrel.
Yeah.
Stabilizers. All right. We are joined now by Mike Zoller. He does the GIS up at USGS HVERI. Good guy, been around since, I met you in 2018 out on the lava flows basically at the Y. That was our first interaction. And here we are today looking at another eruption. And I wanted to see about some of the efforts that you had in, you know, creating this map and some of the difficulties in those early days of the eruption.
Yeah, so unlike 2018, where it was kind of like a slow start with like small fissures within like the Leimani subdivision, and then it later progressed to like its highest levels of activity a few weeks in. Mauna Loa is kind of the reverse, where it starts with super high effusion rates and like the biggest expansion of the flows is right at the beginning of the eruption. So I was lucky enough to get to see it that first morning, but seeing it out the window of the helicopter, I was like, oh man, this is a big area, and like it's gonna be very difficult to map all this. And we ultimately ended up relying heavily on our partners at the USGS National Civil Applications Center, who get to look at classified military satellite imagery, and they were able to do a lot of the mapping of the stuff that erupted within the caldera and just southwest of the caldera, because that was an area that like it was done erupting by the time we got up there in the helicopter, and it was just such a huge area that it wasn't really going to be possible for us to use our traditional methods to map it. And so we kind of focused our efforts on tracking the flow front, and we had a variety of methods for doing that, including mapping lines from the helicopter, shooting distances from using a laser rangefinder from Saddle Road. Also just doing our normal thermal mapping that we've used extensively for years at Kilauea. Those methods were a little bit better geared to an isolated area of greatest interest, such as the flow front that approaches Saddle Road.
Right. So for you guys, you're doing most of this is all automated, right? There's one of the issues if you're doing this as a layman, right? The issue with Mauna Loa is it's so big and everything looks the same. Right, it's hard to get a point of reference when you're looking at like where am I on this flow? Am I here, or am I here, or am I a little bit down? But for you guys, everything's digitized. It's all fed in the data stream, so it doesn't matter.
Well, we have. I've built some maps in the ArcGIS collector map interface that our people can use and reference while they're out in the field. And that got extensive use during this eruption, that we were able to plot the fissure lines from the helicopter that day the eruption started, because I was like looking out the window of the helicopter and seeing like, oh, you know, it's just at the end of this cinder cone that I can see on this map, and I put one end of the fissure there and put the other end down rift several hundred meters because I can see the end of it near this other cinder cone down there. So that's
So you're doing that, the initial fissure placements at least, that's still a little bit of manual process.
And ultimately to get all of this is manual, because even for those people who are using the satellite images, they still have to click on the boundaries.
True.
The technology has not developed to the point that we can just take an aerial image and extract the new lava flow from it automatically.
Right.
The colors blend a little bit too much at the edges. Even thermal images, the gradients fall off right at the edge of the channel. It doesn't fall off at the edge of the flow where the lava is. So even that is a bit of a challenge, and so there's still a lot of manual digitizing when we get an automatic satellite image pushed to us.
Okay. Yeah. Really good. So one of the things that we saw as this was the progression. Eventually you were able to get it so the entire map is filled out, right? And you're updating it multiple times a day. How long are you out there to, make these measurements, to make those updates, to set up the rangefinder and that kind of stuff?
Well, it takes time to get the crews in place, and it takes time to get the helicopter crew up there, but the app that we were using actually allowed the helicopter crew, if they were able to fly close enough to the flow front to map it from the helicopter, they were able to push the update back to us in the office in real time.
Oh, wow.
And so we didn't have to wait for them to land and log onto a computer or anything. But still, there's some distillation that takes place. We need to connect the dots, because often we would get incomplete data, and we would take a look at the webcam and see based on the webcam where the edge of the flow was to fill the gap in the data that we had. So that's why there's still some steps to get it to a condition that we can put it out to the public. But we were able to get a quick look at just the raw distance to Saddle Road, which was the most important thing during this eruption, relatively quickly based on some of these methods that we were using.
All right, very good. So maybe we just conclude with a few basic stats on this thing. How much lava did this, what was the covered area of this flow?
Total covered area during this eruption was 16.5 square miles. The total length of the Fissure 3 flow, the main one that threatened Saddle Road, was 12.1 miles. Not on this map, but we've been working a lot to try to better constrain the volume that came out, because that's important for understanding, geophysically how much lava came out of the volcano's summit magma reservoir. And there's a range of values, and we're still working to get better data sets to constrain that better, but we know it was at least 140 million cubic meters, which is coincidentally almost exactly the same that's in the crater at Halemaumau right now. So you can imagine that entire pit filled with lava down there in the Kilauea caldera. About that same amount of lava was erupted on Mauna Loa's summit and rift zones.
Okay, I have a question for you, and I haven't really asked this one a lot. And it's an opinion piece on this one. If we were to take this Fissure 3 and we were to put it on the southwest rift zone at roughly the same elevation, does it reach the ocean or not?
Probably, if it goes to the west side, there's a good chance that it does, because the slopes are steep, and most of the flows that we have seen go in that direction have gotten the whole way down the flank to the ocean. If it goes to the east, which is a little bit rarer, the only historical example I know of that's happened was one of the 1950 lobes went to the east. It's a little bit slower, and it stopped in the Karoo Forest Reserve. It didn't even make it to the sugarcane fields. So because of those steep slopes on the west side of the southwest rift zone, there is a good chance that it probably would have reached the ocean.
Yeah, that was just a question of mine. I'm looking at it. So in terms of volume calculations for this, was it easier to try and get volume off of this flow versus something like 2018 where most of it's getting deposited out in the ocean?
Easier because we can see all of it, yes, but it's such a huge area, and there's a lot of noise in the data, and also areas where the flow is like relatively thin are like difficult to model, and it's like hard exactly to discern the difference between the new surface and the old surface when you're looking at like just a digital elevation model. So there are still challenges, but it certainly helps compared to 2018, for example, that none of it was lost in the ocean.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, hey, I appreciate your time,
Yeah.
Mike.
It's good to see you again,
Good to see
Dave.
you as
Yeah,
always.
yeah.
Take care, and I'm sure we'll see you again.
Yeah.
All right.
We got some serious wind here. We're out of here. Thank you.
Are you guys ending the live stream?
Outro.
Alright guys, hold on 1 second here, let me flip this back around. Let me grab this so that we have
I need lights on.
better audio on this side.
All right. Maybe not.
Yeah. Hang on, guys.
So you guys are all watershed too.
All right, let's try this again. Don't mind us.
Are you pulling it again?
Oh.
That's why I'm trying to hold it for you.
All right, you hold it.
But you guys
That's what happens when we got to move around.
Really are conscious of your water usage, you know, it's like, okay.
Touch nothing.
Yeah, don't touch this.
All right, there we go.
Yeah, there you go.
All right.
Well, that was the talk story session with USGS and Civil Defense here at Hawaii Ocean View Estates. And I think we went through everything. We were talking a little bit with Ken Hahn off camera, and they're talking maybe come on the program again and talk story one more, debrief about the eruption. But I think we went through basically as much as we could. A lot of this stuff, the posters are, and we went through the new posters. There's some old stuff, but we've already kind of shown that already. And we'll be talking about it again because that's what we do. But yeah, appreciate you guys coming out here.
No, thank you. Learned a lot today. It was a good event to come to. Hope you guys all enjoyed it. Thanks for joining us.
There's some good info in there.
Yeah,
Like,
it's
some
in
actual
there.
good info.
The one piece that I liked to know was when I asked about the lava flow length. It was 12.1 miles, and then to add on another 2 miles, and that's where the saddle road was from where we were viewing. So from Fisher 3 to where we were standing was almost 14 miles away. It's quite a ways.
Yeah, and looked like it's right there at night.
It looked right there, yeah. All right, guys. Oh, you got a question?
Do you want to talk to Ken?
No, we're out.
We'll talk to them later.
Yeah, we're gonna do it later. All right, guys. Thank you very much for joining us.
All right, there's
Aloha.
Anna. We're
I'm
two
holding the
pineapples.
mic.
There's Dan with Hawaii Tracker. Philip is not with us today.
Next
but
time.
in spirit.
Yeah.
Aloha. Have a great day.
Aloha,
right.
everyone.